Welcome to the Berkeley 2030 webinar series. This is the first installment, the after the fact versus the payment request form. The agenda for today consists of going over what the session is about, the after the fact form overview, payment request form overview, resources and support, and then where to go in case you have any questions regarding this session. This session is intended for all Berkeley users. It is only 30 minutes long. Of those 30 minutes, we'll spend no more than 15 minutes going over the after the fact and payment request form overview, with the last 15 minutes dedicated to just questions and answers. Now let's get started. We're first going to go over the after the fact form, abbreviated to ATF. Let's begin with the policy overview of the after the fact form. By definition, after the fact purchases are unauthorized purchases. This is detailed under the UCOP Biz 43 policy. The URL to the policy is listed in front of you. After the fact purchases are purchases that have been committed to the vendor without proper authorization. This means the proper reviews and approvals were not done for this particular transaction. This is why after the fact purchases are against policy and will be tracked for reporting purposes. A justification for why this transaction was an after the fact purchase is always required on the form. So when and how should you use this form? You should use this form to pay for goods or services for which a purchase order should have been established, but was not. Each supplier invoice should be submitted on a separate form. In other words, one form per invoice. You cannot add multiple invoices for the same supplier on one after the fact form. It is required that you attach an invoice to the after the fact request. Payment will not be made if the invoice is not attached. Do not complete this form for purchases that have already been paid with a blue card. So how can you avoid after the fact purchases? You could avoid after the fact purchases by requesting a PO prior to requesting services or goods from the supplier. This means requesting services or goods from a supplier by going through the Berkeley purchasing process. You should not agree to any services or goods from a supplier outside of Berkeley. The purchase order created within Berkeley is a legal agreement between the university and the supplier. You can also avoid after the fact purchases by setting up a blanket PO for multiple payments to the same supplier for emergency services you may need over a period of time. Do not approve a supplier to start services or deliver any goods until you have a PO in place. Talk to your central procurement buyer for advice on how better to plan for purchases so you can avoid after the fact purchases. Now let's review the after the fact workflow in Berkeley. All after the fact requisitions will route to a requisition approver, also known as an org node approver, regardless of dollar amount. After the fact requisitions will route to a buyer when the amount of the transaction is equal to or greater than $5,000. After-the-fact purchase orders are not sent to the supplier. That's the end of the after-the-fact overview. Hopefully that overview has provided a little bit more clarification on what an after-the-fact order is or should be and why it should be processed the way it does. Now let's review the payment request form, abbreviated as PRF. The payment request form also has specific policy and guidelines associated to it. The payment request form is used for specific activities. Each activity has different documentation requirements, which must be attached to the payment request form. Detailed information on the required documents for each activity is listed on the disbursements website. That website is listed in front of you. So when and how should you use this form? You should use this form to pay an activity that does not require a purchase order, previously known as check requests. Each supplier invoice should be submitted on a separate form. In other words, one form per invoice. You cannot combine multiple invoices for the same supplier on one form. It is required that you attach an invoice to the payment request. Payment will not be processed without one. Do not complete this form for purchases that have already been paid with a blue card. So here are a couple examples of when this form is used on campus. A payment request form should be used when needing to pay for conference registration, donations, gifts, and contributions, entertainment, which means catering payment only, freight and shipping charges, honoraria, journal or subscriptions, reimbursements to UC individuals for non-travel and non-entertainment expenses, utilities, telephone, data service, and much more. Now let's review the payment request workflow in Berkeley. Payment request requisitions will always route to a requisition approver, also known as an org note approver, regardless of dollar amount. Payment request purchase orders are not sent to the supplier. That concludes the overview portion of the after the fact and the payment request form. Hopefully, this overview has helped to see the difference between each form and when you should use one versus the other. Now let's go over available Berkeley resources and support. The Berkeley website is a source for the most up-to-date news, announcements, and training resources. The website address is listed in front of you. We also have a Berkeley YouTube channel. Here we post all of our functional demos, which are useful when needing to learn different features of the system. The URL to our Berkeley YouTube channel is listed in front of you. If you need more assistance or have any question regarding anything we've gone over in this webinar, please contact the help desk. Their phone number, hours of operation, and email address is listed in front of you.